Hi everyone, this is Sara Marks. I am the author of Sweeten Up Ginny Darcy, the sixth book in the 21st Century Austen series. This video, like many others I have done before, is commentary and annotations for the book from the author. Before I get into my thoughts for each individual chapter, I thought I would give you a sense of where the idea for this book came from. I wanted to write a book about a cute guy making candy. So I did. No, that is not it. In the winter of 2018 and 2019, YouTube started suggesting candy making videos to me. I would lie in bed in the middle of the night and I would use these to fall asleep before I discovered deep rug cleaning videos. The channel that YouTube suggested the most often was one from Hercules Candy. They are a candy store out of Syracuse, New York. And in the early days of their channel, they were they still are a small family-owned candy company in Syracuse, New York. But in that period of time, they were working out of the family home basement. The home was sort of a duplex with the family living on the top floor, the main floor and the basement being devoted to the candy store. And this was apparently happening to a lot of people in that we were all getting video suggestions. And I was tickled by watching them make candy, but also respond to some of the sillier comments that they got. There was one that they repeatedly kind of joked about where people would criticize them for how they made the candy, their cleanliness, and they were going to call corporate. There was no corporate. It was just the family, and they had been making and selling candies for at least a century. Now, this hasn't changed other than they are now outside of the family basement because of what happened on YouTube and the popularity of their videos. They were able to move into a storefront and expand the business. But at the time, it was just the parents, the son making videos, the other children were doing other things, and they had a part-time employee who was just the most popular guy on the channel. Now, if you don't know this about me, I spent the first 3.5 years of my life living in a small apartment under a candy store, not where they made candy, but where they sold it, penny candy. It was also a hair salon, and I have a nostalgia for Aquanet that is a completely different conversation. But there was a reason I enjoyed the channel. I loved the family members and the people they brought in, and they seemed to just love what they were doing. Now, the young man who was there sort of part-time and not related to them, he was very much a fan favorite. And a lot of people left comments wanting to know more about him. His name was Max. He's still alive. He just doesn't work for them anymore and isn't in videos. But he wisely shared very little about himself. And yet that still didn't seem to stop viewers from developing a parasocial relationship with him. Now, parasocial relationships, I'm going to let you Google that. But this is the relationship we have with celebrities and influencers where it's one-sided. You don't have a relationship with them. You have the content that they make and you enjoy. But for me, at the moment, this young, adorable candy maker got in my head. I was fascinated by how fans related to him, and watching him make candy was enjoyable. Watching him learn was enjoyable, and then turn around and teach the viewers was fantastic. It taught me a lot about making candy in a way that I'm never going to get to experience. I'm not going to, very unlikely. It's highly unlikely that I will ever get to make candy. But I got to see them do things like make hard candy. I learned what cough drops, why they're called drops, because they literally were run through a roller and came out in sheets. And when they dropped the sheet, the candies would break apart. They would drop it. So I loved it. Another channel that routinely came up on my feed was Lofty Pursuits, a store out of Tallahassee, Florida. But this was all in my head as I was writing Love and War in Woodhouse Hall. This is how far back it was. So like 2018, 2019. There's a scene in that where Jenna and Amelia and Eric are driving to Western Mass, and they're talking about their favorite candies. And this was where my head was in the candy making I was seeing happening on YouTube, my own experience with candy. All of this was coming together. So I needed to do some local research, and I looked to candy stores around me. There are two in my area, not like big penny candy stores, but like little people who make their candy themselves. So one is an older, it's beloved by the locals. I found it lackluster. The newer one is built around making marshmallows, and I'm not going to risk insulting the older store. I don't know what's going on with it. I don't know why it is the way it is, but I'm not going to name it. But the newer one, Sweet Lydia's. And their marshmallows are the best marshmallows. I take everybody who comes into town to get marshmallows from them. They had a storefront at that time downtown, and I routinely went in. They had penny candy that you could buy, but they also made candy bars, candied bacon, bark, all sorts of stuff. And I knew that I would learn a lot by going and hanging out there. But it's the store. It's not a candy place to hang out. So I considered what I would need to do to make marshmallows, or what I would need to learn about from a candy store. And I had a fantasy that they would let me make marshmallows. So I contacted their owner, Shannon, and she said I could not make marshmallows, but she would give me a tour and answer any question I had about her experience and the candy she made. She bought the store off of Lydia, who was Sweet Lydia's, and she had a degree in culinary service or science or something like that, but she also went to a school where they taught the business of owning a store and being in the restaurant business, which really gave me a lot of ideas. Because from there, the story didn't just come together. It all made sense. And in the first draft, I did include Jorge as the villain, and I'll talk a bit about where that happened and what wasn't working about it. But I was barely done with the first draft when I realized how complicated and contrived his story was. And looking ahead, it's not going to be a problem. I figured out where he's going to fit best. I also knew I was going to be able to redeem Jorge eventually, and I didn't want to ruin it in this book. Because Jorge is delightful if he's not being the worst person in the world. But I realized as I was rewriting things that Catherine was going to be a much better villain over time. This was all coming together in my head. There were some social media pictures once upon a time of me having gone to Sweet Lydia's and coming out with candy that I bought with my own money because I love them so much. A few months later, you want to guess what happened? Yeah, the pandemic. So everything got changed. All my plans got changed because suddenly I was stuck in the house and not doing things. And it didn't speed up the time frame. Obviously, it just changed everything. But let's get into what ended up being the actual book. Chapter 1. There was a question about how to start this book. In my very first draft, I had Ginny walking to Main Street Sweets, info dumping on you. But that's the first draft. The first draft is me telling myself the story. So Ginny arrives in town, and I don't have any idea why I thought that was a good idea. The fuck yuck idea came from, actually I don't remember where that came from either, but as soon as it popped into my head, I knew that's exactly what Ginny was going to have to do as we meet her. She is going to have to stumble over her words because she is our Mr. Darcy. A lot of the way I imagine downtown Lecoq, and I think I talked about this in Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse too, is based on my experiences living in two locations in Massachusetts. Fitchburg, Massachusetts, and Lowell. They're both small cities, one smaller than the other. They're both struggling cities who are trying to figure out their identity. Lowell is farther ahead in that process. They know what they are, but Fitchburg never really did it. And since I've lived in these cities, I had a much stronger sense of what a downtown would look like in a small city. So Fitchburg specifically has really just two streets that make up downtown, each going a different direction. It's not two-way streets. It's a one-way street and then another one-way street for about 4 blocks. You really just have two, you don't even have 2 rows of storefronts on the block. The main street is really what everything faces, and then that second street is the loop around. There's more park and canal stuff back there. Both cities are mill cities, Lowell being sort of the first mill city, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution in the US, so it's much different. But Fitchburg was also a mill city, so the river was a major part of its downtown, and what remains of the canal system and the mill system is still there. Lowell, on the other hand, is a slightly bigger city that was driven entirely by the mills. Everything about this city is still about the mills. It has more canals as well as the Merrimack River. There are parks around the city, both concrete and grassy, where events are held. Sometimes there are multiple blocks that are shut down for events. The farmers market took place in different locations throughout the city. I wanted to have it feel like that this is where it pops up this week, and this is where it pops up the next week, the farmers market. And I have seen candy and chocolate makers in summer events. Because I do a lot of book sales at markets, I do pay attention to the other vendors around me. I don't understand why chocolate makers do summer events, because it just seems like the stupidest idea. I'm always anxious about the chocolate makers at an event. But the best markets in Lowell took place inside a mill that had this great retail center that has, within months of me recording this, shut down. The building locally made news for being donated to the charter school that was also in the building, and all these store owners on one of the floors got removed and had to figure something else out. It was a local scandal. But I loved going to the mill for these markets because it was like being in a covered internal shopping center. And Sweet Lydia's ended up in there at one point right after the pandemic, and then eventually expanded into being both a candy store and a bakery, and now has their own new storefront elsewhere. So while I wanted to add something like that to the book, it really didn't make sense for it to exist just yet. For the Bennets, this is them clutching at straws. They are desperate to make an impact and to make some money. And for Haley, this is her enticing her community. So I kind of needed it to be outside. The farmers market, even in New England, can last well into the winter months, until it snows. Well, actually, until it gets too cold to be outside. And a lot of them move to inside locations. One of the other stores that served it for inspiration for this was a bakery called Little Delights, which is actually close to where Sweet Lydia's used to be. Over the years, they have grown to include ice cream. They have the best cupcakes. I've had them at events, but they also do macarons, and now they do ice cream, and they carry Sweet Lydia's. So I wanted to use a space that was growing as well as those that were moving around to sort of inspire these candy stores. I did not get to Little Delights to do research because COVID, but they have these great murals that I think Haley would have wanted for her shop. Chapter 2. Now, if you look at videos on YouTube to learn how to make fudge, nearly all of them are about homemade fudge, in literally your home. Primarily about sticking something in your microwave and getting something yummy when you're done. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's clear that this is for home bakers with limited space, instruments, and ingredients. There are a few videos you can see on YouTube about stores making their fudge on like marble slabs and in display windows. So some will do it where shop visitors can watch. Lofty Pursuits in Tallahassee, one of the ones that inspired this book, has a section where they make their hard candy in a very open area where people can display and they can try samples. I wondered if it would upset professional candy makers that another candy maker was microwaving her fudge. Obviously, they wouldn't think about it as wrong, but they might look down on it. And I knew, because Ginny is our snobby, proud Darcy, she was going to have to look down on it, which she probably does. What she doesn't know is what is going on behind the scenes, that the Bennett store is such a mess. Even Carrie in Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse, which is where we meet the Bennetts and their store, she doesn't understand. And thus the reader doesn't fully understand yet. But let's talk about tahine, because that was the worst thing I could think of. Tahine, spicy, flavored fudge. Tahini is not the same as tahine. Tahini is sesame seed paste. Tahine is spicy, like yellow, orange flavored. Put it on your Takis. Dip things that you need to be spicy in that. I think chamoy candy, I think it's called, that is out of Mexico, that's like bright orange. That is more like tahine. It is spicy. Tahini fudge, fantastic. Tahini, mix it with chocolate. But that's what Mrs. Bennett is making. She's making the tahine. Not only did she, I think, misunderstand the two things, but now she has convinced herself that somebody's going to like spicy fudge. So I don't think at this point she has realized that they are two very different things. One being creamy beige sesame seed paste and the other being an orange spice blend that will burn your tongue off. I know people who like spicy candy, even tahine flavored hard candy, but I don't think it would work with the creaminess of fudge. But time may prove me wrong. The real mistake that the Bennetts are making is not the tahine versus tahini, though I still maintain it's wrong. It's the quality of the ingredients and the process she is using that kind of ruins everything for her. But they're cutting corners for a reason. I think this really happens in a lot of businesses where you've invested too much money into things early and you're now not seeing the success you thought that would happen in the payoff. And so now you're cutting corners to make ends meet, to not raise prices, to not, what you think, disrupt the quality, but you're ruining things. Chapter 3. I did want to bring back some of the characters from Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging to this book. Specifically, Jorge was going to be the public villain of this book, and Catherine and Bart enabling him. But Catherine was just too perfect as a more aggressive villain this time. She's already lost control of Will and Lisbeth, but now she's trying to maintain control over Ginny and Anne. Unfortunately, she's lost them both without having a clue. Her problem isn't control or manipulation, but her petty stubbornness with a hint of revenge. This chapter, is the first hint that Catherine is not good with food. It becomes important. I have found in my own life that people use information to control you. They share only what they want to know, so you'll end up doing what they want. And Catherine is doing just that. But Ginny has other people influencing her life and providing information. One of those people, unintentionally, is Colin. And yes, Colin Collins is back in his typical role of oblivious sycophant. I knew even before the previous book had ended that Colin and Charlotte's relationship wouldn't last. I mean, previous book, Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging. I knew their relationship wouldn't last. There's a third person in their marriage, and Charlotte doesn't want Catherine there, but can't get rid of her because she has invested everything into Catherine's promises. I also built Lecoq's community plan into this story, which will come up more in the spin-off series, I hope. Ginny knows nothing about the battle going on within the town, but if you read Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse, you know there's a backstory, and you are seeing it progress in this book. Chapter 4. I wanted to get Ginny and Elliot alone together. In the original Pride and Prejudice, it's not long before Mrs. Bennet sends Jane to Netherfield. I mean, it happens really quickly. I knew I wasn't going to get days together like the original, but I didn't need to hit every beat and moment as if it had happened in the original. My priority was to get Ginny and Elliot away from the candy store with a little forced proximity. If there was anything you can count on happening in New England, it's an unexpected snowstorm. When they happen in the fall, they're fast and they're destructive. So I went back and forth on the kiss in this chapter. Now in Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging, the Jane Austen fans got really irritated with me because I had Lisbeth and George sleep together. I mean, it was off page, but it wasn't a secret. It was quite clear they had slept together because they didn't think that's what Elizabeth Bennet would do. I disagree. I think a modern version of Elizabeth Bennet, given where she was and what Wickham was trying to do, they would have absolutely slept together. She wouldn't have done it more than once, I think, but she would have done it once. And part of me wanted to have Ginny and Elliot sleep together right away, but I felt Ginny would struggle with trusting someone that quickly in knowing them because she had very much been burned by Jorge. And in this book, Ginny is both Ginny, Georgiana Darcy, and Mr. Darcy. But I knew it was going to have to happen eventually, and that there at least needed to be a kiss between the two. Also, there is a Elliot prequel story, and in this chapter, it is about the video that he shows Ginny in this chapter. Chapter 5. Colin arrives in Lecoq. This is where Ginny becomes suspicious about what Catherine's doing. While in the original Pride and Prejudice, there's no machinations around the Bennets, here there are. Ginny is our Darcy in the book, so she's not a passive participant in what's going on. She doesn't have all the information, but she knows bullshit when she sees it, because she's not aware she's the Mr. Darcy. And she's not a perfect Mr. Darcy. She just happens to be snobby. She's not as socially uncomfortable as Mr. Darcy was. So she can see things and is willing to call them out. And also, we're in her head, not Elliot's. So we know what our Darcy was thinking more than what our Elizabeth is thinking. Chapter 6. Carrie Woodhouse is back. As the political machinations start to take shape and Catherine's role in them when I was writing, I knew Carrie was going to have to come back into this story. She's not a major character here, but I wanted readers to see that she's still on the right path. It gives somebody a chance to set up the next crisis, too. That is, after the nonsense of the grand opening. One of my favorite scenes in 2025's Pride and Prejudice adaptation, the movie, was the way they blocked the Netherfield ball. It felt like being at a party, and as the camera took us from room to room, we saw all the little things happening in each of them. This was Elizabeth Bennet's point of view, even though it wasn't her moving through the space all the time. We were seeing things she needed to be seeing. I mirrored some of that in Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging with the Halloween party as Lisbeth moved through room to room. But here I wanted all of it happening in one big space. Here we're in Ginny's point of view, our Darcy. What had that what had that party been like for him? He saw the moving pieces of an event in a space he knew well. Ginny is working to keep all the moving pieces from getting stuck and derailed. But she knows what she's doing. This means she's seeing things that others may have missed. And she's missing things that she probably needs to see. Now, the penny candy store that they talk about on the South Shore does exist. My mother and I went there pre-pandemic, actually like a month before the pandemic. When I was born and we lived in the basement under a beauty parlor and candy store, these formed some really big core memories for me. Aquanet and sugar are like, I know those smells. Those smells are comfort. I don't have them in my home, but when I walk into a space where I smell that high candy scent, it just takes me to a new place. So walking into this warehouse store on the South Shore full of penny candy for stores to purchase was like being slammed in the face with that core memory. And it was lovely. And I knew I wanted to put that in the book. P.S. Emily made out like a bandit from that visit. She wasn't even with me, and she made out like a bandit because I bought this massive box of Swedish Fish, our shared favorite candy, and sent it to her. This will never really come up in any of these books, but this is also a core memory of our friendship, in that the first time we went to Mardi Gras, 1997, we stopped at Walmart, and this is 97. We had not seen Swedish Fish anywhere for decades. It was hard to find, at least in South Florida. And it was my father's favorite candy. So it had like this sort of elevated place in my life that it was harder to get and beloved by a beloved parent. So we stopped at Walmart for road trip snacks because it was 6 hours to drive from Tallahassee, where we were, to New Orleans, where we wanted to be. And we saw these massive ass boxes of Swedish Fish. And we bought them. Each car had one. And that's what we snacked on for the entire trip. So now Swedish Fish is sort of like this core friendship memory. And as soon as I saw this banana-sized box of Swedish Fish at the penny candy warehouse, I bought it and shipped it to her. Because I am that friend. She loved it. But that gives you an idea of what I will do for friends. Anyway, something big had to happen to get Haley, Owen, and Ginny to leave. I've lived in New England long enough to have had different landlords. These buildings are old and pipes burst. Or do they? Chapter 7. Ginny returns to Manhattan and Pemberley Candies. Now, when I first got into Jane Austen fan fiction books, nearly everyone suggested a trilogy of books that was a story from Darcy's point of view. They are by Pamela Aidan, Aidan. It's a trilogy. The first one is called An Assembly Such as This, then Duty and Desire, and then These Three Remain. And these are a trilogy of books that is basically Pride and Prejudice from Darcy's point of view, including things that we don't get in the original because we're not in Darcy's point of view. And it's a fantastic series that gets in his head, that gets you thinking about things the way he saw them. So when I began working on this book and knew Ginny was our Darcy, I was excited to explore how her life evolves when she's not with Elliot. Obviously, the machinations of Catherine play a central part in this chapter. We revisit Will and Lisbeth, but also learn that they are all trying to communicate around Catherine. Nobody's talking to her other than Ginny and Anne, but everybody seems to know what's going on. This is also a great chance to get into Ginny's head and talk about how candy is made. Because I did all this research, why was I not going to share it? I wanted you to know that I knew what what was what. She wasn't just a candy maker. I had done some research. I always typically do some research for a book, or at least just enough to not make it seem like I am oblivious. So this was my chance to let you see that she knew how to make candy, and that to show the impact Elliot and the Bennets did actually have on Ginny. Now, Pemberley Candies specifically is directly inspired by a few stories. One is obviously Hercules Candies in Syracuse, because they were a major inspiration while just conceiving of the story. And while I've never been able to visit their shop, they do have a lot of content on Facebook and YouTube, and you can, as long as you are in the right area, order from them. And they have delicious candy. One thing I loved about Hercules was they have a window into the kitchen so that you can see the candy makers go. And they often, especially around Christmas time when they're making candy canes, let people come in for a full demonstration. The interaction between Heather and Ginny is equally loaded, and there will be a story about that in a future story, a little more collection. Candy making turned out to be a great opportunity as a writer to let Ginny get into her head and process what has been going on. It is a tell, don't show moment, but I think every so often you do need to, especially when you're dealing with emotional shifts, tell some of the things going on. And Anna, who is Ginny's mother, and the Catherine battle, should provide you with hints, the story about that, of why Catherine is the way she is and what's going on in Lecoq. This is your second hint about what's going on. And yes, Anne de Bourgh, Ginny's cousin, was named for her aunt Anna, who passed away. Not before she passed away, just, Catherine is spiteful in interesting ways. Chapter 8. Thanksgiving. I love a good Thanksgiving moment because it's such a fun time for declarations of something. This is a really good reason for people to go places, to see people they might not normally see. And I've already set up a dynamic between Catherine and Elizabeth's family. I felt right to exploit it a little more. I'm going to say this. When you create a world, especially when you're writing books and you have this long series, or you have spin-off series, or planned spin-off series, it's really easy to just lean into the things you've already created in other books to bring forward and build upon, because you've already got a restaurant, you've already got a bar, you've already got a bookshop, you've already got a yarn store with a cafe in it. Why are you going to build another business for just one side scene? Just do what you've got. Use what you've got. So, yeah. Yeah. So the same with characters. Why am I going to create another character when you know who Becca is? You've read Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging. So you reuse a lot of this. And thus I decided to exploit it. But I really had to think about why Elliot would be there. Because it's Thanksgiving, and his family has a candy store, not a restaurant. Restaurants are often open, especially fine dining restaurants, on Thanksgiving, which might cause, like Elizabeth's family does, to have them celebrate a little differently. But why would Elliot come? And that's something that really had to lean into. What would he think he could get from Catherine? And he is desperate to help his family at this point. This was also a chance to let Ginny see what's going on. She's really not ready to recognize her own role in what's happening with the Bennets. But she knows her attraction to Elliot is changing, and because she wants him, trying to be a little more empathetic. Now, Becca, Elizabeth's sister and Ginny's best friend, is an agent of chaos. We always have to remember that. She might not always know when she's creating chaos, but she believes it's for the good of everyone. Also, she dreams of destroying Catherine. She's She's not clear on what the connection is between Catherine and the Bennets, but she knows there is one. And right now she's poking at things through dessert to see what happens. And she's also trying to watch out for Anne, who is her other best friend. She gets a bigger role, and she will also have a short story in the next A Little More collection. But here she's not just the younger cousin like she was to Will. She's Ginny's peer and ally and friend. So she's seeing things and growing tired of her mother, as many adults do, as they start taking their own paths in lives, especially when you have a controlling parent. Every time I write a book about a 20-something struggling to find jobs, someone insists that it's not that hard. Having worked with 20-somethings over 20 years, I can tell you the job market is never good for a recent graduate anymore. College is no longer the key to a good job. So the fact that Elliot is struggling to find a job, that Ginny has to rely on family connections, we really don't know what Anne and Becca are doing. These are reasonable expectations in this day and age. How responsible is Catherine for the bad blood between Ginny and Elliot? Entirely. And the line is right in this chapter. Can you spot it? This chapter also gets a bit into the politics of Lecoq. The plan for this series, when I initially wrote it, was always to have a spinoff that focused on city politics. This was written the year after I wrote Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse. So the next two books were going to drive forward with that, and then things changed. And you'll hear about that in Romancing Mr. Tilney's commentary, which may or may not be available yet. Chapter 9. When Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse while Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse was technically the first sequel book in the series, i.e. it directly followed the story of Leavenworth and Woodhouse Hall, this was the first book where it felt like I could bring characters in from other books. Thus, it felt natural that Lisbeth and Will were more prominent than just chatting with Ginny in an earlier chapter. Especially when this was also in Lecoq and they were in Gardner. So Gardner, which is where the Lisbeth's parents live and Catherine live, is about 20 minutes out of Fitchburg in central Massachusetts. And that was where I was geographically thinking of when I was placing Lecoq in space. So, yeah, it made perfect sense to bring them into this. The Bennet brothers spying for their mother was going to be a real plot in all of my outlines, or at least the assumption that they were, but I realized it was much better for the misdirect because they like Haley and Ginny. Owen, who is equivalent to Caroline, clearly doesn't like the Bennets, but he's already inclined to think the worst of them because he and Catherine have been working on this together. I have done some writing about what Owen's problem was throughout this entire book, and I'll talk more about it towards the end of this commentary, but it has nothing to do with the Bennets and everything with his desires for his store. He's not wrong to think Catherine is leading them down the wrong path, but he has little faith in his sister at this point because this wasn't the plan initially. This store was built when he and Ginny and Haley weren't allowed to step into the roles they thought they were going to have at Pemberley Candies. And to the extent that Ginny was kicked out of the store when she continued to push. So this is not where he wants to be, and this is not what he wants to be doing. Now, a lot of little things have to happen before Ginny has that one last chance to talk to Elliot, where she thinks she's going to proclaim her love. She thinks about her dead Uncle John, who will be important later, and she finds Mrs. Bennet's candy making book. And the people in her circle get to Lecoq to create a little more chaos, specifically a little bit of Becca. The candy book was something I added in the second draft after I removed Jorge's plotline. Originally, Jorge was going to be back in the picture, out of prison, and part of the reason Lincoln Bennett was getting into trouble. He's our Lydia, Lincoln. I tried to keep the letters so it was clearer. At the time, I wanted to give Ginny a chance to come full circle and help someone who was in the middle of the Jorge chaos before their life was destroyed. But it really was contrived. I'll talk more about it later. But the loss of passion from the Bennetts and the burden of their debt to the store really developed when I was trying to find a way to build empathy for Mrs. Bennett on Ginny's side. This was the real journey for her, was to let go of the snobbery around candy making and see that you could lose your passion. You could become so indebted to your business that you lost your joy, but you still had a foundation of delight and joy in candy making. And Mrs. Bennett did. And the book is a showcase of that. The inspiration for the book really came out of another YouTube channel called How to Cook That, where this amazing Australian food scientist, Anne Reardon, does these great videos. Most of the time these days she does scammy video debunking, cool food gadget, but she also does videos where she fixes cake fails, and she explains why something failed with the background of a food scientist who understands the science of baking. And then she'll also make candy things. She's just glorious. And I really wanted to have Mrs. Bennett have that vibe when she was at her best. Now, was Ginny right that Elliot had feelings for her? Yes. In this version of a Pride and Prejudice story, she is right. And he does. He knows he has feelings for her. He is not a person in denial like our original Elizabeth Bennet is. But he doesn't think he can be with her because of the snobbery and disdain. He has the feelings. They've already kissed. He is flirting with her in the candy store. But she's a snob. The John de Burgh and the candy store that was supposed to be was something, and Catherine's role in that, and how it connected to Pemberley candies was something I developed when I decided I didn't want Jorge's chaos as the problem. I knew Catherine was going to be the villain. I just needed to know why she might want to destroy the Bennetts and their store. And everything about Ginny's mother, Anna, and the Meryton Candies storyline came out of what I realized was happening between Heather and Ginny back at Pemberley Candies. And it felt right that this was a battle between two sisters, one who seemed to be the favorite, and the other who was smart but ignored and jealous and wanted to be in the middle of things. I pity Catherine, the girl she was. I just don't like the woman she became. Chapter 12. All right, chapter 10. All right, by now, Ginny is utterly overwhelmed with information as she's processing everything that's going on in Lecoq. She's wrapped up in her desire for Elliot as well, and she needs to see him. You know, I don't know if everybody has these moments, but I certainly do, where like everything is coming at you and you have an epiphany and you need to act on this. That's where she is. She needs to see him. But his nastiness towards her is completely out of the blue for her. And anyone who's read Pride and Prejudice knows that really someone said something innocent that just clicked for Elizabeth, and she understood the context in a way that the person didn't understand. Now, Becca was part of this in the book, but it's really Colin. Again, Becca doesn't always intend the chaos she makes, but she knows it's important that this chaos happens. But this was the case where she didn't understand. But Colin knew exactly what he was doing, and it was easy to let him go wild. I felt Elliot couldn't be so oblivious to his mutual desire because he is a modern man. He knows how he feels. He's not dumb. He wants her, but he wants someone who respects him, and that's what she doesn't seem to do. But Ginny doesn't see as a problem Ginny doesn't see it as a problem being with a man that she doesn't like very much, or at least the people around. I don't know. Ginny doesn't see that liking him is one thing, but not liking the people he loves is a problem for him. And her disdain and disrespect really does not sit well with him. She is stuck in being thrilled at attraction after struggling with feeling safe with anyone enough to share her feelings. Because Jorge destroyed that. But this is why it hits so hard when he rejects her. And as far as Ginny is concerned, she was the one resisting feelings, not him. So to get this emotional backlash from him was disorienting for her. But his accusations of emotional immaturity aren't wrong. He's right. And some people have problems with object impermanence. But it doesn't invalidate Elliot's frustrations at being ignored. And this was something, as somebody who does deal with object impermanence, if you're not in my face, in my bubble right now, I might not talk to you for forever. So it is something that I'm very aware of, that I have to make an effort to check in with people. And Ginny, and this is me at like 48, not 25 or 22. So this is something that Ginny's probably never been called out for. Now, the Ginny letter is not a letter, it's a video. And when I wrote Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging, I wanted Will to have this sort of old vibe to himself, that he sits and he writes her a handwritten letter. And she is mystified with this because she and Charlotte repaired a friendship over email. So she gets this handwritten letter from him. And it's weird. But that's not Ginny. Ginny is not an old soul. She's not overly mature because she's carrying the load of everything on her shoulders. She's young. She's vibrant. She's engaged. She's experimenting. She is Gen Z, and they are used to phones with videos and cameras and pictures. So she was definitely going to be more comfortable making a video rather than writing a letter. Letters are Will. Ginny is video. Chapter 11. I did a lot of research about making candy, and I got to tour candy shops, and I wanted to show what I learned. More. Again. Thus, you get to learn more from Ginny. The original Pride and Prejudice doesn't have any idea about what Fitzwilliam Darcy is doing. Again, Pamela Aiden's trilogy and assembly such as this, Duty and Desire, These Three Remain, that's where you're going to get a great Regency version of Darcy's point of view. So I cannot encourage it enough. But here we are. We're in Ginny's head. She's our Darcy. So we get to see what's going on with her. And I had nothing to base this on when I was outlining this, so I got to take it any direction I wanted. I knew a few things were going to have to happen. I knew Elliot was going to have to come to Manhattan, but I knew he couldn't come to the candy store on his own. Our Elizabeth Bennet just goes to Pemberley in the original Pride and Prejudice, but Elliot is just as proud and prejudiced as Ginny is. They are equal in their anger at this point. Even though he has seen the video, there's a level of embarrassment. He cannot just show up to her candy store. She's going to be there. It's not something he's going to do. So I needed to give him a realistic reason to run into Ginny in Manhattan. Why would he run into her? Video making was already a passion they shared on top of candy, so this little intern plot was born. Also, it made sense for the evolution of what she was trying to do at her own candy store, that if she could prove this concept to Heather might give her responsibility that she had been craving. This also was a chance to ease the relationship Ginny had with Heather and to learn more about the dynamic between Anna and Catherine when her mother was alive and ran the store. So, more information in history. Chapter 12. The conference idea was one of the original brainstorm ideas. The entire series, the entire 21st Century Austen series started with an idea on a train ride to Manhattan for a conference. That very conference, that very year, I went to 2 conferences in one weekend. One was Book Expo, which is what Modern Persuasion got to talk about, and I made my own version of. But the other conference was a Wikipedia conference. That is, I Still Love You, citation needed. We will talk about that in that video's commentary. But this was a chance to pull on what I knew could happen at these smaller conferences that were focused on smaller industries that were more bootstrappy industries. It's not really an organization that's putting it together. It's just a group of people who kind of got together. But important enough that Eliot would come for it. It is important to note that Haley and Johnny are speaking. Unlike the original Pride and Prejudice, I couldn't have them cut off from each other. It absolutely made no sense for a gender swap. If Eliot accused Ginny of ignoring him when he wasn't around, then Haley needed to be the opposite of that, because she's our Bingley. I really wanted to give Ginny and Eliot some time alone together as well, and one of the only time that they had been alone was when they were trying to clear the sidewalk and they kissed. So, even though we don't know how, we can tell that the video Ginny made after Thanksgiving had enough of an impact on Eliot that he is now willing to spend time alone with her. This is not just simple desire. This is a forming of a connection. And Ginny is aware of the change too. So she is taking full advantage of it. She's not sure she's going to get the right response, but she's not going to reject him, or she's going to push as far as she can. I also loved getting Eliot into the store, into Pemberley Candies, because she's been in his, and she has wanted to make candy with him in her space. Chapter 13. Originally, New Year's Eve was going to be dinner just in Ginny's apartment with all the people except Will and Lisbeth. But I decided to move it up to Will and Lisbeth's because it felt cramped, even when writing. And they have a penthouse. Yes, they were always going to kiss when the ball dropped. They were always going to sleep together this night. Chapter 14. So they've hooked up. Ginny and Eliot have hooked up, and this is the first time I had a couple hook up before the end of the book. Usually my books are slow burns. This one is too, but not as slow as the others. And this decision came from reading other books that escalated the romance a little faster. I wanted to see what it felt like, and this book felt like it could naturally sustain an earlier hookup than the other ones did. This also felt like the right place in all the drafts. This was when they were going to hook up. This was really her chance to show him that she's doing what she is capable of doing to change. Now, in the original Elizabeth and Darcy, once she comes to Pemberley, they were probably on the road to happily ever after if Lydia had not done what Lydia did with Wickham. If they had just continued forward, no interruption, he would have married her. By the end of that visit, they would have been engaged. Lydia fucked it up for her sister. And I was watching a video recently that talked about what George Wickham was doing, what he was thinking. Why, if he had preferred Elizabeth over Lydia, if he didn't even acknowledge Lydia existed, what was he thinking? And the person who was doing the video suggested he clearly knew that Elizabeth had caught him in the lie about Georgiana Darcy and Fitzwilliam Darcy, that he had been given what he had been entitled to and had tried to get more. And he must have observed that there was some sort of connection between Darcy and Elizabeth and just wanted to destroy that. And I don't disagree. It does seem like he knew exactly what he was doing when he left with Lydia. Anyway, long story short. Yeah. Wickham knew what he was doing. But that's not what we're dealing with here. In this case, we are dealing with Lincoln. Now, Eliot's Hotel, just a heads up, was inspired by Yotel in Times Square. If you ever want to stay in a place that's nice and is budget friendly, this is the hotel for you. This is not sponsored. I just loved staying in this hotel. I typically did for Book Expo for a few years because it was within walking distance of the Javits Center and within walking distance of Times Square. But then I got bougier. Now, in the first draft, this is where the Jorge plot would have really come together, and it will be in a little more collection for this book eventually. Maybe it already is by the time you're watching this, but this is where it got really contrived, because what would Jorge get Lincoln to do that would create chaos and potentially ruin Eliot's life? Men are not subjected to the same level of purity as women were or are to this day. Men can do whatever the fuck they want. So what would Lincoln have done? What would Jorge have gotten Lincoln to do that would have ruined his brothers? I had him steal a car. It was very contrived. This version, that he was the one who was being accused of blowing the pipes in Main Street Suites, really just connected a whole lot better, especially with what had already happened in Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse. It was really easy to lean into Lincoln's anger as the baby, as very likely the closest to his mother. Chapter 15. I wanted to open this chapter with a way to make sure the reader knew Ginny was doing better with communicating with Eliot. So she does. She says, we have been in touch since he has gone home. She's been accused of ignoring him when he wasn't in her face. So this was important to show her change with one line. She's going to do all that she's going to do without telling him, but she hasn't cut him off, and she's focused on how he's doing in the wake of this, not how it's all playing out. I see a lot of people are often paralyzed when a crisis like this happens. Eliot lives with his parents and is already stuck in a crummy situation, and this crisis would feel like another hit to anchor him in Lecoq. So she is thinking of him and his needs. This is what Darcy, as a character archetype, does. Any Darcy character, she, in this case, needs to free the Elizabeth archetype up to move forward with their lives. Hopefully forward with Ginny in this case, but even if not, just the freedom that Darcy thinks is deserved. And in this case, she wants him to get out of Lecoq to be able to pursue his dream of doing videos and videography. The small town politics of Lecoq are a fun playground for these stories. Relationships start and end around these weird dynamics, and it ended up being inspiration for the planned spinoff. I also hummed and hawed about making Owen the villain, but decided against it. Primarily because I have a lot of sympathy for Caroline Bingley, who is his parallel. She is easily positioned as the villain or one of the villains in the original, but it's not really fair because she's a woman. And in Regency England, women had nothing. They had nothing other than what they could grasp and hold on to. So yes, she harms people, but she harms her brother. She probably harms other women in what we would now call a pick-me. But she is thinking of how to preserve her position, her family's position, and her own future. And I wanted to be kinder to Owen, who doesn't have that problem. He really just doesn't want to be in Lecoq. So he's not our villain. He's not responsible. And he just decides to stay where he is because that's where he's happiest. Also, I loved letting Jenny put all the pieces together to solve a mystery. Chapter 16. Yes, Haley and Johnny Bennett are still speaking. They've never stopped speaking. I loved letting Ginny turn the tables on her aunt. One moment, that sweet, traumatized girl gets to come into her own. Any moment a sweet, traumatized girl gets to come into her own is a catharsis moment. Catherine is not a supportive woman. She happens to be related to Ginny, but Ginny sees through her aunt. She gets to let Catherine know that too. Also, I could not pass up a chance of bringing Emma, Shaw/Wentworth, Shaw-Wentworth into this book. Chapter 17. Ginny doesn't go to the Bennets to take credit for the things that are happening because that doesn't repair what she did wrong. She didn't cause their problem. She didn't motivate Lincoln to do anything. She was a snob. And so she has to repair that. This really doesn't happen in the original. Darcy rights his wrong in that he gets Bingley to come and finally propose to Jane the way he wants to. But that's it. That was his sin, was separating the two of them. That is not Ginny's sin. So she has to come and acknowledge her own snobbery. I really wanted to make sure that Elliot knows she did this all. That was something from the original, that Elizabeth Bennet knows what Darcy did for her because Lydia lets it slip. But Elliot figures it out because of the copy of her mother's book. Because he was in Ginny's apartment. He saw the book at New Year's. She was reading it still. Of course he saw it. He knows she's trying to repair the damage. And because he sees this, plus that she has kept in touch with him and focused on his needs, he is now willing to meet her halfway too. And that's a big deal. Epilogue. It's been 2 years. The book I thought would happen after this is I Still Love You, Citation Needed, which was going to take place right after, so that this epilogue actually happens at the end of that book. And then we would move into what turned into Romancing Mr. Tilney, but was going to be a Northanger Abbey modernization built around this project that the Northangers are in town for. Now, why bring in the Northangers? Because I wanted to. I've always wanted to merge the Enduring series, which I use right under my fantasy pen name, with this one. And Lecoq shows up there, or will show up there when we get to there. But this is always going to be an Easter egg for fans. The Northingers are going to be sort of like the third, fourth tier of peripheral characters for this series. They're going to drive some things forward, but really this is about what's happening in Lecoq at any point in time. The closest you're going to get to an active member is Cole Northinger in this series. He will have some content, don't worry. But I liked the idea of them being sort of the other element that's driving this little battle between the future of Lecoq. If you've ever been to New Hampshire, there is this tiny little theme park. I can't even remember what it's called. It's like there's a Santa's Village. It's like a fairy tale-y nursery rhyme kind of place. It's in this cute little quaint town on the at the base of Mount Washington. It's delightful. We'll talk more about that in I Still Love You Citation Needed, because that's where and the Crafters of Lecoq series when I do those commentaries. But yes, they will be a bigger piece of this. But if you want to know more about them, you'll have to go to the Enduring series. It's not romance, it's fantasy. Will Jenny and Elliot get married? I don't know yet. Probably not. I don't want happily ever after to always be marriage. And it is not for everyone. All right, that is it for the commentary on Sweeten Up Ginny Darcy. Thank you for joining me. If you haven't read this book yet, why not? Why are you listening to this instead of reading the book? If you did read the book, hopefully you can leave it a review. Give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to get notified to know when I post other videos like this. I'll see you in another video. Bye.